At the top of our world lies a place unlike any other. A place without mountains, without valleys, without land. The North Pole is not a continent, not a frozen desert resting on bedrock. It is a drifting skin, a shifting shield of ice floating on a dark, bottomless ocean. For centuries, humans stared into the Arctic and saw a blank space. A white emptiness hiding every possible truth, a lost kingdom, an open sea, a fertile land, or a wall of cold so absolute that nothing could cross it. Even in the late 19th century, no one truly knew what lay at the pole. Some maps showed islands, others imagined solid land. Most simply left the page blank, waiting for someone bold enough, or mad enough, to fill it. For generations, reaching the North Pole was the ultimate prize of exploration, the summit of human daring, and yet it remained untouched. Until a Norwegian airship, Norge, skimmed over it in 1926. The conquest of the pole had not been achieved by foot, not by ship, not by dog sled, nor by skis. It was achieved from the air, by Amundsen and the crew of Norge, drifting above the pack ice in a hydrogen-filled Leviathan. Yet few today remember the strange irony behind that triumph. That another Norwegian had come shockingly close. 30 years earlier. In a world without aircraft, without engines, without radio, without certainty, and without hope of rescue. His name was Fridtjof Nansen. Some called him brilliant. Some called him reckless. Many called him insane, because Nansen's plan to reach the pole was unlike anything attempted before or since. To drift there, not sail, not march, not conquer, but to allow the Arctic Ocean itself to carry him to the pole. By building a ship strong enough not to be crushed, but to be lifted by the pressure of the ice. A ship named Forward, Fram. This is the story of the voyage that nearly unlocked the North Pole decades before the world believed it possible. A story of obsession, isolation, scientific boldness, and human endurance at the edge of survival. A story carved not into stone, but into shifting ice, and into the memory of every expedition that followed. But to understand Nansen, the scholar, the athlete, the explorer, we must go back. Back to a time before Fram, before the drifting ice, before the world knew his name. Because long before Nansen challenged the Arctic had shaped him. Fridtjof Nansen was born in 1861 on the outskirts of Christiania, today's Oslo, into a Norway that was quiet, rural, and still searching for its modern identity. His childhood home, Storfron, rested at the edge of forests and wide, white fields. For most boys, this landscape was a place to wander. For Nansen, it became a training ground. Even as a child, he seemed carved from winter. Skiing came to him the way running comes to other children, as natural as breath. At 15 he skied 50 miles in a single day, for the simple pleasure of seeing what his body could endure.
It is better to go skiing and think God, than go to church and think sport. You are on with your skis and nature. This is something that develops not only the body but the soul as well.
He had the kind of confidence that unsettled teachers and astonished companions, not arrogance, but a quiet certainty that limits existed only to be tested. But Nansen's curiosity reached beyond snow. At university he specialized in zoology, and soon earned a reputation for obsessiveness, the sort of mind that would skip meals and sleep when deep in research. There was also mischief in him. Friends recalled a tall, lean young man with a sharp wit, a dry humor, and a stubborn streak that made compromise nearly impossible. One acquaintance wrote of him, "Fridtjof could not be led, nor pushed. Only the impossible seemed to attract him." In the summer of 1882, when he was just 21, he boarded the sealing vessel Viking as a zoological researcher, his first venture into the high Arctic. For most aboard, the northern ice was work. For Nansen, it was revelation. He studied seals and polar bears, sketched marine organisms, measured currents, but more importantly, he observed the pack ice with a fascination bordering on spiritual. Later he wrote,
The Arctic has a magnetism which draws the mind, a sublime simplicity that is always all but the essentials of life.
On Viking, he saw something that would haunt him for years: enormous fields of ice. Returning from the Arctic, he plunged into academic research with ferocity. His studies of the nervous system, neuroanatomy, drew attention across Europe. He earned a doctorate, published pioneering work. Colleagues predicted a long, distinguished career inside the halls of academia. But Nansen felt something gnawing at him. Science alone was not enough. He wanted a challenge of body and soul, something that would blend intellect, endurance, and daring into one vast, unified test. And so, in 1888, he proposed an expedition so bold that it was nearly laughed out of existence. To cross Greenland on skis, from its uninhabited east coast to its settled west. Greenland, the largest island on Earth. A frozen shield of ice more than 2 kilometers thick, stretching beyond the horizon. Every previous attempt to cross the ice sheet had started from the west and failed. So Nansen decided to begin from the opposite side, the side with no settlements, no supply depots, and no possibility of retreat. If his team failed, they would be swallowed by the ice. The newspapers called it madness. The Norwegian government refused to fund it. A prominent critic wrote, "Nansen seeks danger for its own sake. This is not exploration, but folly."
If we started from the west coast of Greenland, I was quite sure we should not be able to cross. We would be leaving the flesh pots of Egypt behind us. In front of us would be the ice desert, the uninhabited east coast.
This was the logic of Nansen. If retreat is impossible, progress becomes inevitable. In his own words, death or the west coast of Greenland. But even reaching Greenland's east coast was an ordeal. The small sealing ship that carried Nansen's team struggled through storms, pack ice, and towering waves. They drifted south, trapped in the ice for days. When they finally launched small boats to reach land, they were driven by relentless winds and currents far to the south. After nearly 3 grueling weeks battling the sea in open boats, exhausted, soaked, half-frozen, the men finally reached Greenland's eastern shore. But winter was closing in. Their supplies were finite. There would be no rescue. They had no choice. The crossing had to begin immediately. Six men. Lightweight wooden sleds. Skis. A radical minimalistic approach. And a fierce trust in their leader's calculations. They dragged over 1,000 pounds of supplies up from the broken coastline to the start of the ice sheet, a hellish climb of rubble, ridges, and blue ice. Many later wrote that this was the hardest part of the entire journey. Once on the inland ice, they confronted a world stripped to the absolute essentials. No landmarks. No sound beyond the wind. No life. Only white, infinite, merciless white. Daily storms battered them. Temperatures plunged. Progress slowed to a crawl. Still, they pushed west, skiing hour after hour, hauling their sleds up endless slopes. This was the mind of the man who would one day drift toward the pole. A man who believed that endurance was not a gift but a decision, a force of will. There were moments of dark humor too: frozen boots, spilled food immediately turning solid, accidental overnight icing of mustaches and eyelashes. One team member noted that Nansen would occasionally ski ahead alone, stopping to stare at the horizon as if it were calling to him. But it was not the horizon he watched, it was the curvature of the earth itself. He was studying wind patterns, drifting snow lines, subtle topography. He was learning the logic of ice. A lesser leader might have turned back. Nansen tightened his harness and continued. 35 days after leaving the coast, the men reached the summit of the ice cap, 8,900 feet above sea level. From there, the descent was faster, but not easier. Crevasses, storms, and freezing slush slowed their progress. Food ran low. The men grew gaunt. But on October 3, 1888, they reached the settlements of western Greenland, bedraggled, frostbitten, triumphant. The impossible had been done. 6 men, against the predictions of the scientific community and the mockery of newspapers, had crossed Greenland. Norway, and soon the world, hailed Nansen as a genius of endurance and planning. A man with a strange gift, to see patterns in ice where others saw only obstacles. The expedition changed him. It taught him that the Arctic was not chaos, it had laws, currents, rhythms. And one observation in particular burned into his mind. The ice moves. Always. And it moves in a predictable direction, westward. This single insight, combined with later discoveries, would inspire the most radical polar plan ever conceived. Not to fight the drifting ice, but to use it. To let the Arctic Ocean itself carry a ship across the top of the world. That idea, half madness, half brilliance, would become the heart of the Fram expedition. After Greenland, Nansen returned to Norway a national hero. But fame did not soften him, nor did it quiet his mind. Instead, the Arctic, that vast, white world, gripped him more fiercely than ever. He had crossed an ice sheet. Now he wanted to solve the mystery of the ice itself. And the mystery, as always, began with a question. Why did the ice move west? Why did every drift line, every pattern he had observed, from the decks of the Viking, from Greenland's plateau, point in the same direction? The answer came from a tragedy thousands of kilometers away. In 1881, the American exploration ship USS Jeannette had been crushed by ice north of Siberia. Its crews scattered across the floes, fighting for survival as the Arctic consumed the ship whole. 2 years later, far to the west, on the coast of Greenland, over 2,000 miles away, hunters found debris unmistakably belonging to the lost vessel. A broken flagstaff, marked planks of wood, scientific instruments. The items had drifted across the entire Arctic Ocean. To most, this was an eerie curiosity. To Nansen, it was revelation. He wrote,
"These fragments, they are the handwriting of the ocean itself."
Other clues emerged. Driftwood, Siberian larch, had long been found on the shores of Svalbard and Greenland. The source could only be the great Siberian rivers, meaning the wood had been carried by the current all the way across the polar sea. Separate pieces of evidence, scattered across decades, now converged into a single elegant idea. A massive ocean current flows beneath the Arctic ice, from east to west. And if the current could carry driftwood and wreckage, could it also carry a ship? This was the thought no one else dared to entertain. The radical plan. Most explorers sought to avoid the pack ice. Nansen planned to embrace it. To sail a ship into the high Arctic near the new Siberian islands, allow the ice to seize it, freeze around it, and then drift. Slowly, inexorably, across the top of the world. With luck, and with time, The ship might pass near the pole itself. It was a plan that struck most people as lunacy. To enter the pack ice was to die. Ships were crushed like eggs between moving floes. Critics raged. He intends to place men into the very jaws of the ice and wait for the inevitable. But Nansen was sure of one thing. Ice does not crush upward. If the hull were designed properly, if the ship were shaped like an enormous wooden seed, rounded and wide, sloping on all sides, then the ice, instead of squeezing it to splinters, would force it upward, lifting it safely above the pressure. That became the core design principle of the vessel that would change polar history. A ship built not to fight the ice, but to yield to it, to rise, to float on pressure, to survive where no ship had survived before. A ship named Fram. To realize his idea, Nansen needed a crew unlike any other. Men of strength, yes, but more importantly, men of resilience, humor, and oddity. People who could endure months, years, of darkness, boredom, and confinement. There was Hjalmar Johansson, a clerk turned athlete turned soldier turned adventurer, equal parts brilliant and troubled. Otto Sverdrup, steady, unshakable, a man who could command a ship in any sea. Several scientists, engineers, carpenters, and one cook known for loud songs and reckless jokes. They were eccentric, fearless, the sort of men who signed up not merely for danger, but for a journey defined by uncertainty. Nansen later wrote of them, "I chose companions who could meet misfortune with laughter. In the ice, humor is as vital as bread." Yet assembling men was the easy part. Assembling money was harder. Many donors balked. Governments hesitated. Newspapers mocked. Norway was not wealthy. Funding such a wild plan seemed irresponsible. But little by little, contributions arrived, from scientists, enthusiasts, and even schoolchildren who sent tiny coins in envelopes addressed simply, "For Mr. Nansen's ship to the North Pole." And so it began. In a quiet shipyard on the banks of the Akerselva River, the keel was laid. Rounded hull to be squeezed upward by pressure, avoiding crushing. Thick oak and greenheart planks, stronger than steel at low temperatures. Reinforced ribs that formed a kind of exoskeleton. Shallow draft to reduce the risk of being trapped. Steam engine dual-use design, propulsion and steam heat. Fram was not built for the sea. She was built for the ice. When she was launched in 1892, she glided into the water smooth and squat. Observers stared in confusion. Some laughed. But Nansen smiled, because he knew the truth. The idea was no longer an idea. It had wood, nails, iron. It had men, supplies, dogs. It had a name, a direction, a destiny. The plan was set. Sail east. Seek the ice. Surrender to its grip. And let the earth itself carry them toward the top of the world. Next would come the journey outward, the whales, the storms, the polar bears, the moment Fram was swallowed by the pack. But the true expedition had already begun. The moment Nansen decided to drift in order to advance. In the summer of 1893, Fram slipped into the waters of Christiania Fjord. The hull gleamed in the sun, broad, squat, impossibly strong, yet strange to every sailor who saw her. She was not beautiful, at least not in the traditional sense. She was a vessel of function, a ship conceived to yield, not to conquer. And in yielding, she would endure what no other ship could survive. Nansen stood on the deck, surveying her. His mind, as always, was already far ahead, imagining the ice, the currents, the drift. Around him, his men were a mix of excitement and tension. They were about to enter a world that cared nothing for human ambition. The first days were deceptively calm. Fram moved slowly eastward through open water, leaving Norway behind. Birds cried overhead. Families waved from the shore, their gestures fading into the distance. For the crew, each wave that lapped against the hull was a reminder. Once Fram entered the pack, there would be no turning back. By mid-June, the ice edge appeared. A vast field of broken floes, white as bone, stretching to the horizon. Nansen gave the order, engines stopped. Fram drifted forward into the frozen world.
Now vi surrender, it is no longer our journey, but the journey of the ice. We will move, or we will remain, and the ice will decide.
And the ice did decide. It pressed, it groaned, it shifted. But Fram, designed with a rounded hull, lifted upward, borne by pressure instead of being crushed. Timbers creaked like joints in a living body. The ship was alive, moving in a rhythm dictated by the Arctic itself. Days turned into weeks. The monotony of motion began to weigh on the men. There was no horizon, no land, no sun for months. Time became abstract. They measured it with scientific rituals, meteorological readings, depth soundings, magnetic observations. Yet even this discipline could not quiet the mind. By August, Fram was trapped solid. Not crushed, not broken, but imprisoned. The ship and crew had become one with the ice, part of a slow, relentless current moving westward across the Arctic Ocean. The sun sank below the horizon in late October, and darkness claimed the Arctic for months. Yet even as the cold settled in, there was order. Nansen established routines, exercise, readings, scientific work. And in this order, in this ritual, the men kept their minds alive while the Arctic tried to claim them entirely.
To drift is to wait. And to wait is to test not only the ship, but the limits of endurance, the limits of what a man can endure without losing himself to the silence.
And Fram drifted. Westward, slowly, inexorably, carried by currents invisible to the eye. The movement was maddeningly unpredictable. Some days they advanced, some days they slipped back. Yet every creak of the hull, every groan of timber, reminded them that the ship was alive, aware of the ice, responding to its silent commands. Boredom became a formidable adversary. The crew passed the long hours with games, storytelling, music, and letters written but never sent. They hunted seals and birds when possible. They mended clothes and repaired sledges in anticipation of the day they might leave the ship. Every action, no matter how small, became a measure of control in a world where control no longer existed.
The ice does not rush. It does not hesitate. It moves with a patience no man can hope too much. Yet, if one can read its course, it becomes a guide.
By January, Nansen knew the drift would not take them directly to the pole. The ice was moving, yes, westward, but not far enough north to reach the target. And so the first seeds of his next, most audacious plan were planted. He would leave Fram with a small crew, striking out over the ice with skis and sledges, risking starvation, frostbite, and death, in a desperate attempt to reach the unattainable.
If the pole will not come to us, we must go to the pole.
Fram was drifting, but not toward the pole. Nansen recalculated daily, tracing their slow westward movement on charts that grew more unforgiving with each new entry. The current behaved exactly as physics predicted, and precisely as ambition feared. They would not reach the pole by drift alone. It was in this darkness that an idea took hold of Nansen's mind. A dangerous idea. To leave the ship. When Nansen first spoke of the plan, the reaction was cautious, then tense. Captain Otto Sverdrup listened carefully, his expression unreadable. He was a man of discipline, of loyalty, of method. The ship was sound. The men were alive. Others voiced quieter concerns. There were no confrontations, no raised voices, only the heavier strain of unspoken fear. Some believed the journey would end in starvation. Some feared that if Nansen failed, the entire expedition would be remembered as folly. Nansen listened. He argued calmly. He showed numbers, calculations, routes, evidence rather than rhetoric.
The last step over the bridge of resolution has now been taken. The decision is made. Once a bridge is burned, there is no choice but forward.
Only one step forward without hesitation, Hjalmar Johansen. Strong, methodical, tireless. A man whose endurance matched Nansen's relentless will. Together, they refined the plan in silence. 2 men. Light sledges. Dogs. Kayaks lashed atop the loads, fragile vessels against open water. Enough food to survive. Not enough to hesitate. On March 14, 1895, Nansen and Johansen prepared to depart. The temperature hovered near -40 degrees Celsius. The sun had returned, but weak, a pale reminder rather than a promise. They stepped onto the ice beside Fram. Behind them stood warmth, order, companionship. Ahead lay pressure ridges, shifting leads, and an idea sketched onto maps. The men aboard watched until the figures grew small, then smaller still, until they vanished into the white. Fram drifted on. Nansen walked north. Progress north was slow, punishing, and relentless. The ice was not flat, but broken, a maze of pressure ridges, jagged blocks piled like ruins. Each kilometer demanded hours of labor. Each step forward was answered by the quiet drift of the ice beneath their feet, undoing their gains while they slept. Storms arrived without warning. Winds cut through wool and fur alike. Temperatures plunged low enough to make metal brittle and breath painful. The dogs weakened. Food vanished faster than calculations had predicted. Slowly, the arithmetic of survival overtook the arithmetic of ambition. By April, Nansen knew what he could not yet say aloud. The pole was no longer attainable. To continue north was to choose death. The decision to turn back was as difficult as the decision to leave Fram. It was not failure that haunted them, but the fear of having risked everything for nothing. South did not mean safety. It meant uncertainty and hunger. They slaughtered dogs one by one, feeding the survivors with the flesh of the fallen. Each animal was both companion and ration. The act weighed heavily on them, yet hesitation was a luxury they could not afford. Soon, seals became their only reliable source of food. Seal hunting was brutal, intimate, and necessary. They waited motionless beside breathing holes, sometimes for hours, rifles frozen to their hands. When a seal surfaced, there was no room for hesitation. A single shot meant survival. A missed shot meant starvation. By late summer, open water began to appear between ice floes. The Arctic transformed again, from solid prison to liquid barrier. Their sledges could go no farther. Here, Nansen's foresight saved their lives. From the beginning, he had insisted on carrying kayaks, fragile, cumbersome, seemingly absurd. Now, they became essential. They launched onto the open sea cautiously, the kayaks riding low, burdened with supplies. Ice floes closed and opened around them like jaws. Eventually, land appeared, Franz Josef Land. Not refuge, merely reprieve. They had reached it too late in the season to continue. Winter was returning. With no shelter, no fuel, and no certainty of rescue, they did what humans have always done when the world refuses to care. They built. From stone, snow, moss, and driftwood, they constructed a crude shelter, part cave, part hut, part tent. The roof leaked. The walls shifted. The floor froze solid. Hunger actually wasn't their primary struggle. It was monotony. They had killed enough walruses and bears. They ate boiled bear meat and blubber for every single meal for months. They burned blubber in a stone lamp. Smoke blackened their skin. Grease turned their clothes into stiff, frozen shells. They slept in the same double sleeping bag to share body heat. They were so cramped they could barely turn over. The winter of 1895 to 1896 was a test of mind as much as body. They rationed ammunition. They rationed movement. They rationed speech. Days passed in silence, broken only by wind and the sound of boiling blubber. They read the same few pages of books until memory replaced ink. They measured time not in dates, but in storms survived. And yet they lived. When spring returned, they repaired the kayaks once more. They packed what little they had left. They stepped back into the water. What followed was not triumph, but persistence. Short crossings, long waits, endless calculations of wind and ice. Then, one morning, the impossible occurred. A human voice. Another man stood before them, as improbable as a mirage. British explorer Frederick George Jackson, who was leading an expedition to the same archipelago, coincidentally encountered Nansen and Johansen and transport back to Norway on his ship, the Windward. They had not reached the pole. They had reached something rarer. They had walked away from certainty, endured the full indifference of nature, and returned not victorious, but alive. And in the Arctic, survival itself is a form of truth. While Nansen and Johansen struggled across the drifting ice and the frozen seas, Fram continued her silent, patient voyage. The ship had no guide but the currents, no companion but the vast, indifferent Arctic itself. Months passed. The ice pressed, shifted, groaned, yet Fram endured, moving steadily towards Svalbard, as if the ship itself understood the rhythm of survival better than any human hand. In August 1896, nearly 3 years after leaving Norway, Fram emerged from her icy prison. The crew aboard, exhausted but triumphant, saw land again for the first time in years. The ship, battered but unbroken, carried stories of patience, resilience, and the quiet triumph of engineering over the most indifferent of forces. Between 1898 and 1902, she carried another crew under the command of Otto Sverdrup deep into the Canadian Arctic, mapping unknown coastlines, charting islands never before recorded, and extending the geographical knowledge of the high north in ways that would endure for decades. Later still, Fram would sail south. In a quiet reversal of history, the ship carried Roald Amundsen toward the Antarctic, where, in 1911, he would reach the South Pole. Today, Fram rests in Oslo, housed within the Fram Museum. Visitors walk beneath her hull, close enough to touch the timbers that once resisted the slow, relentless pressure of polar ice. Nansen and Johansen returned shortly thereafter, weary, frostbitten, yet unbowed. Their journey had not reached the pole, but it had reached something equally profound, the edge of human courage and endurance. Their reports, diaries, and photographs would inspire generations of explorers to come. In the years that followed, Nansen's life became a testament to curiosity, courage, and compassion. He applied the same daring mind that had navigated the Arctic to innovations in underwater technology, designing tools and methods that would advance oceanography, like the Nansen bottle, a device for obtaining samples of water at a specific depth. He turned his genius to humanitarian work, aiding refugees across Europe after the First World War. He developed the stateless person's passport, known as Nansen Passport, which allowed stateless refugees to travel between countries, earning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1938. Proof that the spirit of exploration is not limited to the Arctic, but extends to the moral and social frontiers of humanity. Fram's drift and Nansen's journey remind us that the greatest journeys are rarely those measured in miles alone. They are measured in endurance, in the courage to step beyond convention, and the audacity to pursue a dream when the world calls it folly. To be called mad is often the first sign that one is on the threshold of discovery.